Zach Charbonnet, running back, UCLA, 6 foot, 214 pounds, 9 7/8 inch hands. Ran the 40 in 4.53 seconds, had a 122-inch broad jump, 18 reps on the bench, and 37-inch vertical. Last year, he had 195 attempts, 1,359 rushing yards, 14 touchdowns, 37 receptions, 321 yards, and no additional touchdowns in 10 games.
So Zach Charbonnet originally went to Michigan, had a solid freshman campaign, and then kind of to a lot of people's surprise, ended up transferring all the way to the West Coast, ended up going to UCLA for his final 3 years, joined up with good old buddy Chip Kelly. And there were many that thought, including myself, that he was going to declare last year. He was going to declare as a junior. Mm-hmm. He's got the size. He's got decent-ish speed. He has a lot of the things pedigree-wise that you would have assumed, like, oh, this is a prototypical, comes out of his third year, probably be a day 2 pick, more like third round, but probably a day 2 pick. He decides to go back to school. And overall, I don't think it was a poor decision on his part to do that, because I do think he did make some leaps in his game this year. Not drastic leaps, but I do think he advanced in his game this year. The most difficult part, though, with studying Zach Charbonnet that I had a tricky time with is his offensive line is fantastic, which we normally are saying the opposite about these players. It's right. And there will be players we talk about how bad their offensive line is, but he has a great offensive line. So many of his big plays that you see are the product of fantastic blocking. So that's what makes him a little bit more of a difficult evaluation, is how much of that is him, how much of that is his offensive line. And that was one of the things that I had a harder time breaking down. Currently for me in this class, he's currently running back 5. I gave him a 73.93. So just for a reference point, like ETN was a 74 for me when I graded him. So he's just a hair under Travis Etienne. So obviously very good prospect overall, very solid grade, pretty solid reading the holes, very patient runner, but he's not overly elusive, not great game speed, like long speed. It's doable, but that's nothing you're going to talk about as a really positive trait. I think he has decent quickness for a bigger guy. And I know he came in a little bit later at the combine. From everything that I had heard, he was playing at closer to 220, 225 during the season. I think he slimmed down to run a better 40 time. I'm wondering what that 40 time would have been if he would have been 10 pounds heavier. Would have been in the upper 4.5s as opposed to lower 4.5s. So I'm curious to see what that is. One of the better contact balance players in the class overall. And there's some good things there as far as pass catching that you wouldn't have expected out of a bigger, more physical back. So he is one of these backs that does truly profile as a 3-down guy. I'm really struggling to see, is he a solid back or is he a really good back? And I do, like, if I'm being completely honest, I truly don't know. I'm really having a hard time pegging him, because for a while I had, like, his score has fluctuated for me a bunch. When I watch games, I'm like, oh, this is actually better than I thought. This is actually worse than I thought. And it's gone up and down. His score was as high as a 75 for me at one point. It was as low as a 71 for me at one point. Like, it has fluctuated a ton because I keep picking out little nuances of things that are a little bit better and things that are a little bit worse in his game. So he's been all over the map. I think he's a good player. I don't think he could end up getting round 2 draft capital in the NFL draft. I think he's more fit for the 3rd round, though, for me personally.
I think 2nd round would be a stretch from what I've seen personally. I don't see the one thing that, like, any one of his attributes, none of his attributes wow me.
Sure.
And that's kind of where I'm at with this guy. And for me, if you're going to get drafted that high, especially nowadays, I think you have to have 1 or 2 things that pop. Mm-hmm. So I do think he's a guy that's going to end up, I think, slipping a little bit. Perhaps that's why he stayed in school. Maybe he knew he had some things to work on and was hoping to work on them. I mean, like you said, catching passes this year, in only 10 games, 37 receptions compared to last year. 12 games, he had 24. Mm-hmm. So he basically went, from 2 catches a game to nearly 4 catches a game. So that he did improve in that area, and I think that's an important thing for a guy like this, because if you're not going to do if you're not going to pop and you're not going to like be very, very explosive or anything like that at that size, you better do something else. You better be good in pass blocking. You better be able to catch the ball. And I think, going back to school for this fourth year helped in those respects.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with a lot what you guys are saying. He reminds me of James Conner a lot.
It's a good comp.
That's who he kind of reminds me of, which is, again, it's not a fancy player, right? But he's a running guy. He's going to give you running back 1 numbers potentially in the right situation or be a running back 2. And Zach Charbonnet for me seems like a really safe player in this class. I like you have him at number 5, Garrett, because I have him right. So I have him in my 3rd tier. So I have a Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, each in their own tier. And then not far behind Gibbs is I have Devin Achane, Tajay Spears, and Zach Charbonnet. Okay. That's my next tier. I would take Devin Achane first as it stood today.
Okay.
And then Spears and Charbonnet are really close because what does he have? He's got really good size, really good size that pops out. He has really good numbers this year, averaging almost 7 yards per carry, like Matt said, in 10 games. Those are solid numbers, the 37 receptions. Really good patience and vision, like Garrett said. I really like the way he works in tight quarters for a guy of his size as well. Real productive early down. Like almost 40% of his carries went for first downs or touchdowns last year. Those are really good productive numbers. Yeah. It's going to really entice NFL teams. And another reason I have him in that tier is because I could, like you said, with his draft capital, I could see him going there, and I feel like his opportunity is going to be really good coming into this class. Liked him in the passing game this year. I thought he ran some pretty good routes as well. Sometimes I get a little bit. I was like, will he be a little bit more limited in the NFL? I don't know at what he does there for when I'm watching him. Love the contact balance. He's a real true north-south runner. Always finishes his run strong. Runs strong as well. Little tight in the hips, not a lot of wiggle out there.
Not a lot of lateral stuff.
Yeah.
Where do you guys land on the power on this guy? I feel like for a guy that was 225-ish, 220, 225, I wanted to see a little bit more of the physicality.
I felt like it was adequate.
It was interesting because he didn't punish people like I wanted him to.
Right.
But you see really good power in short yardage, goal line. So he's got the lower half that he will move the pile. He will move people. So I think he has good power, but some of these guys that are, maybe not even quite as big as him, you'll see them launch themselves at people and just run through people. He doesn't do that quite as much as I want.
You know what? Know why? I think I have the answer for that. Why he doesn't run with as much power? You mentioned it. When he wants to, on short yardage, he runs with good power. But for the most part, he doesn't. I think it's because he runs a little too upright.
He is an upright runner.
So he loses when we say
he can get caught off guard. You know what I mean? When he's not expecting to have to lower the shoulder, he's up too high. He gets hit, and sometimes he's not, falling forward, so to speak. He's maybe falling sideways.
So when we talk about it on the podcast and you hear us say it, because I'll mention other runners, like, hey, they're upright runners. I guess to give that a little bit clarification, when you're an upright runner like that, that's what happens. You lose the power. Like it's why we want a running back to run behind their pads, essentially. They want to get down low because that's where the power comes from, because then you can get that launch and you get the shoulder into the player as well. So
the old adage is the low man wins.
Low man wins.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think he loses that power of his running style. Now, sometimes it's hard to coach out of a player because it's just how they run. Adrian Peterson was an upright runner.
Sure. But he was a freak also.
So was like Matt Forte was an upright runner.
Yep.
So Zach Charbonnet to me seems like a really solid player. My final note on him, really for dynasty fantasy purposes, was probably a really good sell early, like that typical hashtag 2 to 3 year window. James Conner, I again felt that same mold, but he kind of like broke that mold a little bit, where he had a really good year in Pittsburgh, then a couple down years, and went to Arizona and played well again. Was a running back 1. So I feel like Zach Charbonnet is a really good draft pick because I feel like his return will be substantial. Like he'll look good enough early where if you want to get out, you won't lose out on the pick. You'll get a year or 2 out of them and then be able to sell them for a solid return.
And that makes sense to me. I had it in here in my final notes as well. Like he's one of these guys that's going to need to have like a 70% share to be fantasy relevant, to be like big time fantasy relevant. So he's never going to be a guy that if he's splitting time 50-50, you're going to love it. You know what I mean? He might be bordering running back 2, running back 3 in that kind of scenario. If he's getting 70% of the carries and he's like the team's lead guy, you can expect some pretty.
He needs a Tyler
stuff.
Algier situation.
Yeah, he does.
That's he's young. I mean, he's 22. Like he's played a lot, but he's young. He's 22 years old, so he's not coming out where he's like this older running back. He'll be 22 in this season. Again, I have Zach Charbonnet in that 3rd tier. I think he's a very solid prospect. I feel he's safe. He's not, to me, he's not as exciting as Devin Achane or Tajay Spears. but I feel like his floor is a lot safer than those two.
He is. He's a very safe guy. I would be shocked if he falls to day 3. Like, I don't think he's a round 4 guy. It's possible, sure. But
he's a third round.
He really seems like a prototypical third round pick.
The NFL knows all the same things we know. You know what I mean? Right. There are a lot of available players.
All right.
Fortunately for him, there's not a lot of big players. Like he's one of these outliers. So if somebody's looking for a 220-pound back, there's only a couple places. There's
only a few of them
in this draft. So that might push him up the board a little bit. But if they're not interested in that, or they've gotten it somewhere else in free agency or something like that, he might be a guy that slips a little bit. Yeah, so it is one of those things.
Very interested where he goes.
It could go either way. Yep.
Very interested. But I mean, I came away overall. I know, Matt, when you said you watched his tape, like he was boring to you, and I totally get that. And that's why I said, like, well, that's why he reminds me of James Conner. Like, there's like, but he gets it done. Like he's kind of running back, like you mentioned, in the right situation. He's gonna get it done. So Zach Charbonnet, running back UCLA, very solid. Had a couple games missed last year, but still very productive. And productive last year as well. So I like to see, it's always good to see a running back that comes out and he produces back-to-back years and not just has that one big-time year. So Zach Charbonnet, UCLA, I give him a thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
Yep. Solid. Like this.
I was going to say, it's not all the way, right? It's like cocked a little bit.
A little bit.
No, it's not Fonzie, but you know, it's
hey.
Yeah.